Hello everyone, Soldier of Fortune here, and today we're going to try and do something more out of the ordinary. So, we're going to try and do a comprehensive guide for Hearts of Iron 4 that takes you from beginner to where you can play the game comfortably. Now, we're running this on version fork 1.8.1, and we're going to do so. I suppose let's start with the basics. This is the screen. Single player, new game. You've got two start dates. One that allows you to set up everything. Almost everyone plays on the first start date, so I suggest we begin here. Or one that puts you right like 2 weeks before the war is declared, and you go from there. Which means basically the AI is going to set up your nation, and you just take it from there. From what I heard, Paradox, when they were releasing their stats about this thing, I mean through cons and so on, when they were releasing their stats, almost no one uses the second start date, but it's there, so whatever. All right. Now we're usually people recommend that you start the game when you play, and even the tutorial is done with Italy. Now we're not going to do Italy today because, well, it's been done before. We're going to try to do Germany. Now the reason why I'm doing Germany is because it's going to allow me to show a little bit more of gameplay. Maybe, I don't know, we'll see. Right? But they are the main drivers of the conflict and so on. Now, you've got some options here. We're not gonna bother with them. Well, let's say we will bother them. So custom game rules is something that most people are going to look into after they played like a couple of games, right? And here you can give buffs to the major nations if you wish to do it. We're going to discuss what major nations, minor nations, what they are. Well, originally at the start of the game, Germany, Italy, the USSR, France, United Kingdom, US, Japan, and China are considered major nations. So that is 8, if I count correctly. Yeah. So we have 8 majors at the beginning of the game. Now, the way that the game runs is there are the countries are split between major nations and minor nations. So everything that's not in the top 8, as described here, are considered minor nations. Technically, there's only 7. But China is included in here out of, let's say, because it's really important for the game in Asia. So otherwise, in Asia, you'd only have Japan as a major, and they could dominate everything. So then there's this particular thing which you can modify and influence the AI behavior. We're gonna leave it as default for now on. From now on, this basically changes the way the AI guides itself politically. Like for instance, I mean, we'll be playing Germany, so it makes no difference, right? But if Germany were to be AI, you have the option for it to be default. You have the option to block it into the fascist tree, or you can make it go democratic, or you can make it restore the Kaiser, or you can make it go absolutely random if you want it, right? Uh, the same goes for everything. Almost everyone has a different path or an alternate path, and you can control all of these nations that influence in order to influence the way your game is played. Foreign policy things. So this determines how some of the game mechanics are used. You can absolutely you, so you can influence it here. Like for instance, here limited. What does this mean? This means that there's some war goals. War goals are first. Let's talk about war goals. War goals are basically a rough translation of casus belli, which means cause for war. And basically, any country that is including Germany and the USSR, which you might say they're more authoritarian, cannot just go to war by snapping their fingers. No, they need to sort of like convince their population that they have a reason to go to war against a certain nation. This is the war goal itself. It takes some time to generate, right? Less for fascist nations, and for democracies, they can almost never go to war. They have certain prerequisites, right? So let's talk about this thing first. Now, for some reason, I've selected the Soviet Union, so I'm going to click back here for a second. So you can see the sorry about that. Let's say we choose Lithuania. Here we go. You can see the ideologies here, the politics that are involved in the game. You've got the democratic nations, like UK is predominantly democratic, France is predominantly democratic, and so on. Right? Sweden, for instance, predominantly democratic. Right? What was that clicking? Yeah, Lithuania. Okay, so you've got the democratic ideology, right? The communist ideology. I don't think we need to explain much more about that. That's the Soviet Union, and I think Mongolia out of the others. So I'm using the arrow keys to scroll here. I could also just move the mouse to the edge of the screen to do that. But yeah, Mongolia is 100% communist. Okay, so you got democratic, communist, fascist. Again, that's Germany. And you've got something called the non-aligned ideology, which is basically all these all these countries in Central Europe, well, except for Czechoslovakia, right, are originally non-aligned, as you can see here. Now, the government itself is considered an authoritarian regime, so not a democratic regime, right? But these can vary, right? So some authoritarian regimes allow elections, some authoritarian regimes don't allow elections. It depends on the way the political situation was at the time. Oops, I'm going to pause recording for a second here. All right, and we're back, or at least I think we're back. Let me just double check that. Yep, we do seem to be back. Okay. Sorry about that. So, what was it? What were we talking about? Yes, the ideologies. So, basically, communists and fascists can create these war goals at any time. The non-aligned ideology needs at least 50% world tension, I believe. Yeah, 50%. We're going to talk about what world tension is at the end. And democratic nations, I think, need either 100% world tension, or they need to, or they are only able to justify against nations that have caused a certain amount of world tension, which I don't know the specifics of. So this is what limited means. Now, this the next one means war goals can obviously be declared, or through focuses only. We're going to discuss what that is. Right, releasing nations and stuff like that. So this is just ways to. These are very advanced ways to influence the game. We're not going to discuss. We're not going to discuss it right now because it's irrelevant. You're probably, I mean, from the point of view of a beginner, it's irrelevant. You're probably going to discover it for yourself. Now, the difficulty level, we're going to play on regular. I recommend that you start out on regular as well. So on recruit, what happens on recruit is you get more political power. You get a bunch of bonuses, and to your political power gain, to your production efficiency, you get less of a penalty from lack of resources and so on. So you can actually read them here. Now they might not make sense to you right now, but we're going to go into the game later. In civilian, you get even bigger bonuses, right? In veteran, you get some penalties, and the AI gets some of the bonuses that you were getting in the other easier. In the other easier modes. So I recommend you play on regular, just because otherwise you might get used to the bonuses if you play on too small. And the more difficult ones, they don't really make sense. I mean, you want, or at least it's my philosophy, that you want yourself and the AI to be on equal footings, even though, well, most people say the AI is kind of dumb, and to a certain extent they're right. Iron Man mode. Iron Man mode is this version of the game where you cannot save stuff. So you basically only have one save. It saves automatically when the game auto saves, and therefore whatever you do, you have more impact. Your actions have more impact on the gameplay, because you can't just go back and say, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I shouldn't have declared war. Now, for the purposes of this particular playthrough, we don't play on Iron Man. Historical AI focuses or not? Historical AI focuses is this. This, if you select it, it allows for the nations to pick their focuses. Well, we haven't yet discussed focuses, so that doesn't make any sense. To model their gameplay in a certain way that's about as close as possible to what happened historically. Otherwise, like for instance, you can. So, for instance, let's do this very simple thing. You see this red outline here. To explain what differences between historical and non-historical. So this red outline here, right, is the Rhineland. Now the Rhineland back in 1930, I don't think it was in 36. I think the Rhineland was rebuilt. Well, anyway, after, so let's put it this way: after the end of World War One, the Rhineland area was agreed to be demilitarized. That means that Germany was not allowed to station any military in this area close to the border, obviously. Now, at some point, and we're going to do this very early in the game, Hitler remilitarizes the Rhineland. Basically, German troops march all the way up to the border, right? And the UK and France only issue a diplomatic objection to this thing. They're saying, hey, you weren't really supposed to do that, but we're gonna let it slide because, after all, as somebody puts it, this is no more than Germans walking in their own backyard. Okay, so on historical, no one is going to oppose the militarization of the Rhineland, the remilitarization of the Rhineland. However, if you're on non-historical focus, there's a bigger chance. Again, it's still unlikely that they're going to oppose it, but there's a bigger chance that France says, no, you can't do this. And if you can't do this, then there's a bunch of other stuff that you are delayed from doing as Germany, right? So we're going to leave it on historical for now, just to make sure that there's no surprises in the game for now. Now, I'm going to start the game. Now we're going to discuss everything afterwards. And this is the main screen of the game. Now we're going to talk about all these buttons and icons and everything that you see up here, and all these icons that you see up here. But first, let me point out a few things that might be different from what you're looking at when you're looking at the game, and why that is. So I'm running the game with a few mods that are, and these mods are visual in nature. It's just a personal preference. So the first part where you see the difference is because all of these things are in color up here. This mod is called color buttons. I prefer them. I've just gotten used to them. It's what it is. A second point of difference that you're going to see is maybe these buttons are in color, and maybe when we go into, maybe these things are popping up more than usual. So the colors in my game might seem a little bit more powerful than in your game. That's because I'm running with another mod. It's called color blindness mod, which just gives the game a little bit more color. I prefer it that way. I know Paradox, I found that Paradox has a preference for a more washed out palette of colors, and that just doesn't fly with me. I want to see what I'm looking at. The third difference is the map itself. You might see that my map has a different font here, and if you zoom in, you're gonna see that I have a lot more cities on the map than you might have, and so on. This mod is called the Strategic View Adjustments, and this just is a complete overhaul of how it looks. I just like it this way because it's crisper, it's clearer, everything stands out better. It's just again one of those mods. Now this last one might might not be Iron Man compatible, in a sense that you can't unlock achievements with this mod on, just because there's so much modifying the textures of the map and so on that they don't consider that you might do something sketchy and so on. But for the purposes of this for the purposes of this video, it makes no difference. All I'm saying is, if my game looks a little bit different than what your game looks like, it's most likely the mods, and these are the 3 main mods that I use that change the appearance of the game. So if you feel the need to use them just so that you can see what I'm looking at, feel free to do so. That's the name also: color buttons, color blindness, and strategic view adjustments. Sorry about that. Now, what is the game itself? The game itself, so you can say, some people describe it as a World War II simulator. It's not really, because it doesn't go as a... It's a grand strategy game set on Earth during the time of World War II. So let's put it that way. Now, the game itself is very logical. Basically, you're in charge of a country, right? You can lead its armies, you can declare wars, you can conquer people, you can fight in the wars, and so on, right? But you've got to remember one thing: everything in the armies themselves, right? So let's take a look at this unit, okay? It's an infantry division. You got the symbol here, right? You've got a lot of stats here. We're gonna bother with them later. But here's the important part. This is the equipment that the infantry division is using. It's using 12 pieces of artillery, 910 guns. Now this isn't. That's what I'm saying. And 30 support equipment. Okay, now this is the part where I'm saying it's not really a one-to-one simulator, because, for instance, in this infantry division, you have 9,000 manpower right here, 9,000 manpower, and only 910 guns. So there's a sort of a 1 to 10 ratio of a man to a gun, but this is done just for game balancing purposes. Otherwise, the values. So if you had 9,000 guns here, the values would have to be scaled in such a way that they would be very low. So even though you're thinking, okay, well, I've got like only 900 guns in a 9,000 strong division of artillery, just think of this as not necessarily individual guns, but like pack of tens, for instance. So let's think about that in a certain way. So, okay, so the point is, a division needs to be equipped with this equipment, and all of this equipment needs to be produced, right? So everything here, all of these guns and cannons and support equipment, they all need to be produced. So if you want to field a larger army, you're going to need to equip a larger army, which means you're going to have to produce a lot of equipment. Now, the equipment itself is produced by military factories. So if you look up here, you've got the number of factories. This is how the HOI4 sort of deals with the economy itself. And that is, it spreads, you can have, relevant to the economy, you have military factories, naval dockyards, which, they build ships, and civilian factories. Now, what do civilian factories do? Before we go back to military factories, let's talk about this. So if we go to this panel, which is quickly accessible by pressing T. You see here the amount of civilian factories. Now you can use the civilian factories to build stuff in your country that is civilian in nature. So basically the dockyards, they build ships and they repair ships. We're going to discuss that when the time comes. The military factories, they just build military equipment. This is the production tab. You can find it here. Quick shortcut is Y. Okay, so basically these military factories are assigned here. That means you have 10 factories producing guns, 2 factories producing support equipment, 1 factory producing, I'm sorry about that, I don't know what came over me, 1 factory producing cannons, 2 factories producing light tanks, 2 factories producing these trucks, 1 factory producing planes, 1 factory producing different type of planes, another factory producing a different type of planes, and then we have the naval dockyards, which are producing submarines, destroyers, and all other kinds of ships. We're going to get into that much later on. So basically what I'm saying is you need armies, right? The armies need equipment. The equipment needs to be produced. It needs to be produced by the military factories. And these military factories, as you can see here, need to consume some resources. Now, in order to see the resources that are available to you, you can see them up here, right? These are all the resources that are available. Now we have a surplus of 2 oil, 250 steel, 93 aluminium, 11 tungsten, and 2 chromium. So these are the base resources. Oil itself is not actually used in the production, but it's used to run. It's used to oil turns into fuel, and fuel is up here. So basically, we have access to two units of oil, let's say, all right, and this turns into 105 fuel, as you can see here, daily. And you've got a certain amount of fuel that's stockpiled, and the fuel is consumed by the army when it runs, right? The trucks, the tanks, they consume fuel when they're in action. The airplanes, they consume fuel. The Navy, they consume fuel. You don't have to, it looks very complicated in the beginning. You don't have to bother with it. All you got to know is this tells you when it's green, when this number up here is green, it tells you how much time will pass until you have fully replenished your fuel stocks. Right? In this case, it says 1.2 years, so we're gaining fuel. There's these 2 arrows here. Right now we're gaining fuel, and it's going to take 1.2 years to reach maximum stock capacity, maximum storage stockpile capacity, which, as you can see here, is 359,000 units of fuel. Right now, when we're actually consuming fuel and not gaining fuel overall as a net, these arrows are going to turn into red, and they're going to go down. This bar here tells you how much fuel you still have in stock, and this number is going to change and tell you, if it's red, it's going to tell you with the current consumption how many more days of fuel you have. So that's all you need to know about fuel at this point. Now, in producing, I said we need resources. So basically these guns, so each unit of guns takes 0.5 production. Again, you don't need to worry about these things. You just got to understand that every military factory, for instance, generates 5 units of production per day. Each gun itself takes 0.5 units of production to be constructed, and it also takes 2 steel, which means we have 10 military factories. For them to run full capacity, they are going to use 20 units of steel in this production line. Now for the support equipment costs, and you can see the costs in resources up here. This one you don't really need to worry about the costs in except to the extent where the more something is costly down here, you need to think that in order to generate a larger amount of them per se, you're going to need to assign more factories to that production line, right? So like for instance over here, all right, you can see up here it tells you how many units are produced per day, and if there's less than one unit being produced per day, it tells you that, well, you know, we're producing per week, we're producing this much per week, and so on. So as I was saying, the producing military equipment consumes these main resources, which are rubber, steel, aluminium, tungsten, and chromium. Now, you can see how many resources you have access to at this point in your industry with your current economic law. We're going to discuss that later. But if you go to resource map mode, which is you just press F7 or you look for it right here, right? You will see how many resources you have and where they are located on the map. And this, I just like to point something out, which will become very apparent. So in any case, first let's take a quick look around the map, right? Like for instance, you notice that I'm going to press Y again, we need 5 rubber. As you can see here in the map, we don't have any rubber. Now, the way the world is constructed, the way the world is allocating resources, in Europe itself, there is no rubber. We go to Africa, you have some rubber here and there available in Africa. You have a lot of rubber available in Ceylon, in current day Sri Lanka, right? A little bit here in India, and a shit ton of rubber. The world's metric ton of rubber is available here in this particular area right here. So all of the world's rubber is focused, with the exception of southern India, right, and just the sporadic amount in Africa. All of the world rubber is focused right here. And as you can see, the following countries control most of it: British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. And also France has a lot of rubber down here in the Indochina, or current day Vietnam. Now I think there's also some rubber down in South America. Yeah, there's a little bit of rubber in Brazil too, but not enough to sustain the world economy. So what do you need rubber for? Well, you need rubber for trucks and you need rubber for planes, basically. So if you want to field a mobile army, or if you want to build planes, you're going to need rubber. How do you get rubber? Well, we're going to either invade those nations or find a way to trade with them. Now, another point that I want to point out is this. You see here it says 2 oil, but you look at the map and you said, ooh, there are 3 oil available in Hanover. Why is it that we only have 2 oil? For that, we need to look at one of the laws of our country. Now I pressed Q to bring this pop-up up. We're going to get into it later, but for now, let's talk about this thing. This is the export, the trade law, basically, and it tells you how much of your raw materials, which are these things that we're looking at, are available to you and how much are available to the export market. So we are right now set on limited exports, which means that only 25% of the materials, of the raw materials, are available for export. On export focus, you go 50-50. On free trade, you're only allowed to keep for your governmental businesses, which is your military business, you're only allowed to keep 20%. I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to get that. I'll be back. And it turns out it stopped ringing while I was going to answer it. So maybe they'll call back later. So you're only allowed to keep, to use for your military buildup, 20% of your resources. Now you're going to say, well, why the hell would you want to do that? Well, you want to do that because there are severe differences in the bonuses that you get. Like, for instance, construction speed right now, you get a 5% bonus. If we were on free trade, we'd get a 15% bonus. Research speed, you only get a plus 1% bonus. On free trade, you get a plus 10% bonus. So you're basically you're giving up some resources, right? But you're getting all these bonuses back. It's a balancing act. We're going to discuss why you might want to do that later on or not. Closed economy, for instance, you get all of the resources available to you. So you're not trading anymore, you're not exporting any more resources. They're all available to you. Now, as you can see, we're not allowed to pick closed economy. We're not allowed to change to closed economy because we have to be at war. And we have to have a different law here. It says war economy or total mobilization, and right now we're on partial mobilization. We're going to discuss all of that later. So, first of all, what were we saying? Yes, you want to go to war, you need armies. In order to have armies, you need to build equipment. In order to build equipment, you're going to have military factories building that equipment that is generating a certain amount of production per day and consuming a bunch of resources depending on whatever you need.